Moving on now to the second of our featured articles for the month. I am joined by economics contributor Marty Sullivan, a very familiar face to people who watch the show and read tax notes. Marty, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
So, Marty, all this news about Russia and Ukraine, depressing. Oh my God, buildings blowing up, families being destroyed, murder, mayhem. It's terrible stuff. And what can we do? You know, terminate the treaty, right? But the first time I ever mentioned that to somebody, they shook their head and they're like, Bob, 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 you don't get it. You don't get it, Bob. It's not going to do any good because the Russians have conduit entities and they'll go through some other nation, maybe a nation that's a member of the EU, maybe a nation with a U.S. tax treaty, who knows? But they'll use conduit shell companies in other countries, and terminating the treaty with Russia won't do any good. Now, you sat down and you did some research, you crunched some numbers, as you so typically do. And one of the things I love about your tax notes articles is that I tend to be a visual learner, and you presented us with a figure 1 and figure 2. Folks at home listening, if you've got the article, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's something that stands out on those charts. What is it? What did you discover when you scrutinized the data?
Well, before I get to the boring numbers, you just reminded me of something about talking. I really don't know a lot about treaties, and so I just sort of asked around. And when I'm looking for wisdom, I go to one of the great sources is our founder, Tom Field. And I said, Tom, what do you think about doing curtailing the treaty? And I forgot that his lovely wife, Marcia Field, was at Treasury, and she actually helped negotiate the Russia treaty. So, and the first thing that Marcia said was, ain't gonna stop Putin for one darn second. And I think we all knew that, we all sort of know that. So anyway, I thought that was a little fun color commentary to add in there. Now to the boring numbers. Let me just say, as background, as an economist, when we look at foreign investment, we look at cross-border investment flows, there's two types. There's the real stuff, like when I go and invest in a business in Canada. And then there's what economists call the phantom stuff, where I'm just kind of investing in a shell company that's investing in another shell company that may be investing somewhere else. And in most countries, you have a lot of, you see a lot of inbound real investment and maybe a little bit of shell company activity. But for some of these haven-like jurisdictions, it can be very large. And for some unpublished yet, for some research that I'm doing right now, compared the GDP of countries to the inbound foreign direct investment, and something like 50% would be a lot. For Cyprus, it is not 50%, is not 100%, it is 20 times, 2,000%. What that means is that most of the investment that is coming into Cyprus is not real, that is somebody investing in a real business, but it's folks investing in shell companies, conduit companies that is going somewhere else. So then what we looked at, we said, for this, what you're pointing to in the article, which just, it floored me when I saw it, because what the data show, and this was actually originally from Russia's central bank, has this data, 1/2 of all the investment out of Russia goes into Cyprus. Now, Cyprus, by way of background, is about 2/3 the size of Connecticut, has a population of about 1 million. You know, it's not a large economy. It would be like the United States, 1/2 of all investment by the United States would take place in Trinidad. And so you go like, well, that doesn't sound exactly right to me. And of course it isn't exactly right. And what it's telling us is two things. One is that the Cyprus economy and the Russian economies are very intermingled. You can't really talk about one without acknowledging the other. And the second thing is a lot of it is just conduit, not real activity. So that was a real eye-opener for me. I must have read 50, posts on the internet about, Cyprus is Moscow on the Mediterranean, and the two economies are intermingled. But until I saw the data, it didn't really hit home. And it's just absolutely incredible.
Well, why Cyprus? That's my next question. Why Cyprus? Does it have uh, strange tax rules, banking rules? Does it have a light touch in terms of its regulatory involvement? You can say that about a lot of countries, but is there something about like a debtor-creditor relationship, something where Russia got their hooks into Cyprus and Cyprus became dependent and just fell into their sphere of influence?
Well, Bob, I can't answer your question why Cyprus, but I can give you some background, which is Cyprus used to be a dependency of the UK, and in 1960 it became independent. And it was, if you take a look at the map of the Mediterranean when you have nothing else to do, Cyprus is all the way on the eastern side, close to Syria. It's a beautiful. It must be well, all the photos. It's an absolutely beautiful place. So that's one thing to keep. So in 1960 they gained their independence. They're agricultural. They're not very well developed. Well, as you know, when the wall came down, the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, I believe. The Soviet Union came apart into the Russian Federation, and that's when the Russians, you remember that old movie, The Russians Are Coming? That's when the Russians came to Cyprus with lots of money, buying real estate, buying yachts, in some cases, buying citizenship. And it really transformed that little Cyprus economy from maybe an agrarian, tourism, shipping, into more of a financial hub. And then what even made it even more attractive was in 2004, Cyprus became part of the EU. In 2008, it adopted the euro. And don't forget that they used to be a British, so they used British law. And apparently, from some sources that I'm reading, what really attracts Russians to Cyprus is that law, which gives them property rights that they may not have, certainly do not enjoy in Russia, and even in other jurisdictions. So, and you mentioned the light touch. Of course, Cyprus has a very low tax rate, has very favorable tax and regulatory rules. It has a not undeserved reputation of being a little bit dicey when it comes to some of the rules and regulations. And also, the whole environment there. Oh, the other thing is, it's sort of what like Naples, Florida is to a Minnesotan. I imagine Russians really enjoy living in Cyprus. There are an estimated 40,000 Russian residents in Cyprus.
That's a lot. That's a lot. So they like the sunshine and they like the environment for owning property and having property rights that they might not have back home. Now, when we talk about tax treaties, you've noticed in your article that there was a speech Putin gave back, I think it was in March 2020, about updating the Russian treaty policy, not their model treaty policy per se, but he sort of gave what sounded like an ultimatum to people to saying, hey, we're going to make some changes here. And if you don't go with it, we're just going to terminate the treaty. And then we read at the beginning of this year, okay, January 2022, that the Netherlands-Russia treaty is just terminated. And not by the Dutch, by the Russians, with the implication being that the Dutch looked at this ultimatum and said, we're not going to play your game. We're going to walk. We're not going to go for that.
Right. And by the way, that was pre-invasion.
Yes.
Termination. So go ahead.
Right. So what was going on there? What were the demands that Putin was making? It was about withholding taxes. Is that what it was?
First of all, he made the speech about 2 years ago on national television, and to hear it'd be like, imagine Joe Biden came out and started talking about tax treaties on national television. You go like, really? Since when? So that was the first thing that was striking to me. But it shows you how important it is to the Russian economy to have all this foreign investment. Okay, what was going on? It was 2000. It was right in the midst of the COVID crisis, which is of course still going on. But and they were short of cash, and the withholding rate on dividends coming out of Russia was 5%. Well, if you, under the treaties, all the treaties that they had, well, if you got rid of that treaty, or you renegotiated that treaty, you could get a 15% rate. And they needed the money. They were short of cash. This is pre-invasion. They needed money, so they said, "Hey, folks, for all the dividends that are coming out of Russia, we don't want 5% anymore. We want 15%. And if you don't do it, we're just going to terminate the whole treaty," which creates havoc. Depending on, in every different country, it would be a different type of havoc because they have different domestic laws that will take over and so forth. But right now, let's just call it havoc. And what's another interesting point about that is that, we're talking about abrogating our treaty with Russia. Well, he's abrogating his treaties. It's like the oil and gas. Should we stop buying it? Well, he might stop selling it. There's two sides to this coin. And then to go back to Netherlands, which is a very big country when it comes to foreign investment, as our listeners know. The Dutch just said we're not going to do it, and Putin abrogated the treaty. And the three treaties that he did renegotiate, at least, this is ongoing stuff, so it might not be perfectly up to date, but he renegotiated the withholding rate, raised the withholding rate for Cyprus, Malta, and Luxembourg, those kind of tax haven places. And he's going down the list. He's going to Switzerland, and I can't remember where else next. So treaties are important. They're in play. They were in play before this all started. And it's every time I start looking at this stuff, instead of getting a better understanding, I get more questions. Treaties are very complicated law. And by the way, they are law. They're not just handshakes. They're, as you know, Bob, they are just like Congress passing a law. When the Senate approves a treaty, you can't just go snap your fingers and go, I don't feel like doing that anymore. You have to pass another law or abrogate the treaty.
Well, treaties are complicated, and one of the more complicated provisions has got to be the LOB, limitation on benefits provision. And this is important stuff because when you think about it, two contracting states, they want all of the benefits of that treaty to go only to the residents of that state. They don't want those treaty benefits to be available to the whole wide world.
Right. Let's explain.
Yeah.
To folks who don't live and breathe this every minute of the day. The abuse is called treaty shopping. What does that mean? Okay. So I'm a dude, I'm in country C. Okay. I want to invest in country A because that's where the gold is. But my country C doesn't have a treaty with country A. What should I do? Well, I'm going to shop around, quote unquote, shop, look for a treaty between a country like country B and A, and then I'm going to pretend to be a resident of country B or somehow make myself eligible for the treaty benefits of country B. So that's treaty shopping. And then to stop treaty shopping, you have LOB. Don't use acronyms, Bob. Limitations of benefit clause, which try to prevent people like me from using that country B treaty to get treaty benefits. The reason why that came up was the U.S. Cyprus treaty is an old treaty. It's 1984. It was negotiated. It was ratified it was approved by the Senate in 1985, and it came into force in 1986. We were all preoccupied with the passage of the 1986 Act, so I don't really remember that at the time. But anyway, back then, Cyprus now has a corporate rate of 12.5%. Back then, the rate was 42.5%. Back then, Cyprus didn't have all these Russians and all their money in there. Back then, it wasn't part of the EU. It didn't have the euro. It was an entirely different situation. And more importantly than all of that, back then, our treaty policies, I understand it, and I'm just an amateur in this, but our treaty policy has totally evolved to to have tougher limitation of benefit provisions. And so the limitation of benefit provisions that is in the U.S. Cyprus treaty is kind of shaky. Not good. It's an old-fashioned one that the Treasury, not my opinion, the Treasury, it doesn't negotiate or implement, include in their new treaties this type of lenient limitation of benefit provision. So, and it's called the business purpose provision, which is a subjective test. And what that says is if a guy like me wants to use country B, I can just say, well, I have a real business purpose for being in B, even though I live in C. Well, what does that mean? Well, you know what it means? It could mean almost anything. You can read some court cases and it's mind-numbing, teeth-chattering, just splitting of hairs about what this business purpose test is. It's very subjective. It looks like something you can get around. Or to put it differently, let's say I am a legitimate business person and I want to invest. I am investing in B. So I am using the treaty so I can invest in A. Well, I can't even be sure that's going to work because I don't know how the IRS is going to rule on that and how the courts ultimately might rule on that. So let's just get rid of that. Let's have more objective types of standards to establish residency and to prevent treaty shopping. So that was a big red flag for me going, oh, maybe I got a really big story here because there's like this big loophole in the Cyprus treaty that even if we abrogated the Russia treaty, they're just going to use Cyprus. But it turns out that's probably wouldn't happen.
Okay, so as of now, when the U.S. negotiates a treaty, it's not using that old archaic limitation of benefits provision. We've got better rules now. How do we get this better rule into an updated treaty with Cyprus? It takes two to tango, right? They'd have to agree to that. And there are other roadblocks. I mean, getting a treaty ratified, first getting it through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, not as easy as it was once upon a time.
Are you talking about a certain junior senator from Kentucky?
I might be.
Who Rand Paul. So that's one. Let's start at the end. One big obstacle until 2 years ago, and it's still an obstacle, but at least the dam broke a little bit, is that Senator Paul was blocking all of the negotiated tax treaties that went through the Foreign Relations Committee. And so they couldn't get a vote on the Senate floor. You need 2/3 of the Senate to approve a treaty. And under these ancient Senate rules, he can put a hold on that. And basically one senator can just say no. And his concern was about providing information about U.S. citizens to foreign governments would be a sort of imposition on the secrecy or privacy rights of U.S. citizens. On the flip side, U.S. businesses were really ticked off because they really like treaties. So, but I think it was a couple of years ago, they approved, McConnell did some maneuver, I still can't figure out what it is, but basically caught his fellow Kentuckian and got 3 or 4 treaties approved. But note, there's still, for example, the Hungary treaty, which was negotiated like, I don't know, over 10 years ago, is still hanging out there in limbo. And that's no small thing because the Hungary treaty, like the Cyprus treaty, is an old treaty that needs to be updated because it doesn't have a good limitation of benefits provisions. So even if we let's say Cyprus was a problem, and so we shut it down, like you say, why Cyprus? Well, let's just go to Hungary. We'll just do some treaty shopping from Hungary, which is actually even weaker in its provisions than Cyprus. So, but here's the thing. It's like, I feel like you're chasing your tail. Well, you say, what should we do? Well, what we should do is it's already done. We just have to get Rand Paul out of the way and pass the treaty that we've already negotiated 11 years ago. So, it's just totally a crazy situation. We've already done it. So, and we need to update all of these treaties, but negotiating it, then you talk about, again, we're working backwards. We have Rand Paul, we have treaties that are on the, you know, in the inbox, so to speak. And then we have to renegotiate a treaty. And that's just, you know, it's a bilateral negotiation. Everything's on the table. And so it's a very complicated process.
Well, it almost sounds like you're describing a game of whack-a-mole. We could terminate the Russia treaty and they'd go to Cyprus. We could act on the Cyprus treaty and they might go to Hungary. And I'm guessing, thinking ahead, projecting, if you did something about the Hungary treaty, they'd find even a fourth country. So hard to make progress there, but you've done a very good job of describing that scenario.
But one thing, Bob, though, I do want to make clear is that you're making it sound like it's not that easy to use these limitation of benefits loopholes. For example, let's say we shut down Russia treaty. Now all the Russians go, well, I'm going to go to Cyprus. Okay. Well, you would have to indicate on your tax return, well, or whatever it is that reduces the withholding. You'd have to say, oh, I changed my mind. I was Russian, now I'm Cypriot. Well, guess what? These days, post-invasion, that would raise red flags anyway in any situation, because one is you're moving from a real country to a tax haven country. So the IRS is going to scrutinize that very closely. And now the IRS, and it has formally announced, is working closely with FinCEN to investigate anything to do with Russian, especially in suspicious situations. So it would be difficult to do this. It would be difficult to do this before the invasion. It's even more difficult to do it now. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I don't know enough, but it's not something you would do and sleep soundly at night and not worry about.
Understood, Marty. Running short on time. I got one final question for you, but it's a doozy. I've saved the best one for last. I've listened to you so often talk about the virtues of neutrality in the tax system. It's kind of a gold standard. Don't favor this person, don't favor that entity, be neutral. And as an economist, you thinking about neutral in the context of the global tax system, are there exceptions to that? Can neutrality be contextual? Because the question that I asked David Moritz when he had him on in the first segment is, there's this whole pushback that you shouldn't weaponize double taxation, or you shouldn't weaponize tax policy generally. And I want to make the point, I think this stuff is political to begin with. I think it's all about carrots and sticks. And when I run into economists saying, no, we have to have neutrality. Let me turn it back to you. Dish on me here. What's going on?
A few quick points. First of all taxes are political, right? Now, I would love to have a perfect neutrally tax system as an economist, but 5 minutes on Capitol Hill will cure you of that fantasy. In this environment, we're talking about not just politics, we're talking about foreign relations. And the decision on whether to take these steps is a foreign relations decision, which is not certainly not my expertise. All we can do in the tax world is inform who should be the real policymakers about what the implications of this would be. And, Russia is not the first country to invade another country in our lifetimes. In fact, Turkey invaded Cyprus, 1974. No sanctions, no treaty abrogation or anything. And then we have problems with a lot of foreign countries that do very bad things. And so is this a special case? I don't even want to start to address that, but we do need to understand the foreign policy implications much better. And as I think David was saying, this might only be a symbolic gesture, but symbolism can be very important. But I can't as an economist, put a price tag on that. So I won't try.
There you have it. Stay tuned for more coverage of this issue in future editions of Tax Notes, because it sounds like Marty's working on a sequel to this piece with more information on the Cyprus situation. This piece is titled, again, Can Cypriot Conduit Companies Provide Treaty Benefits to Russians? And you'll find it in tax notes. Marty, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bob.
Want more like this? Subscribe for more tax videos. Special thanks to our executive producers, Jasper Smith and Paige Jones, and showrunner and video editor, Jordan Parrish.